Right, good afternoon everyone, hopefully you can hear me. I probably should start with an apologies, having all the highlights of Google Classroom and then Teams and Office 365. I tried to up the ante talking about safeguarding checklists, policies and responsibilities. I could of course just done a demo about our products, but I wanted to broaden it and talk about some of the things that we really need to consider. And suggestion to Chris was to flip it around and do it from a trust perspective, so more about where the school looks and some of the things we need to be aware of. I'm kind of hoping lots of these things will be things you'll be familiar with, but it's always handy to kind of consolidate things into one place. So, safeguarding software, the things we should do, and hopefully making sure we look at the things that we must do. And I really kind of wanted to break it down into some key areas. So we're all hopefully familiar with Kingsley in terms of our obligations, prevent duty, which gets thrown about as part of the conversation. GDPR and data protection, I should really whisper that so that somebody's ears don't pick up over there and Tony wants to ask a question. So about that, we've got our safeguarding checklist about the things we need to be aware of. We're all responsible for safeguarding and duty of care as people who work within the education space. Ofsted inspection framework has a feedback into that, which is more and more important, so it's important that we're aware of that. And if I put my trust governance hat on, it's very much a question of, are we doing these things? How can we evidence that? Do we have confidence that should we get the call, these kind of aspects are being done? But even if we put that sort of Damocles of Ofsted away to one side, as people responsible for good governance in the school, we actually want to make sure these things are being done for the right reasons every single day. And then there's other questions to ask or things that we could consider in the broader sense. Now this isn't all about just checklist of things. We're going to talk about how software and some of the solutions available can actually support on that. And I always start off with my nice big picture of the kind of network topology, because I'm a firm believer there's a starting point, which is it doesn't really matter what you are looking to manage or measure when it comes to the use of technology across your school IT estate. If you don't have a full grip or a full picture of what you've got, how can you possibly gather context to make sure what you're doing is effective and all-encompassing? So it's a really good starting point. Not surprisingly, vendors like ourselves and others provide the means for you to go away, discover, and pull that information into one place so that you have a sense of what kit's there, by platform, by network infrastructure, and that of course includes all those switches and other things that can be the bugbear of an IT manager's life. But once you've got a sense of all the things that are there, then that to me is a good foundation point for any conversation about what we're doing with our safeguarding or any tools we might be adding. Most of these things come at a cost. That's always a challenge in the current context. And alongside that cost, there's also a sense of the stuff that we're going to be putting these tools onto. Are we actually using that kit effectively in the first place? And that often is the more important part of the conversation. Are we doing things right now before we try and add stuff to it? So the first one is Kingsley. I've just noticed my face appears in a lot of these slides. I apologise to those at the back who are getting some kind of mental scarring by the end of this. Hopefully it's not on all of them. So, keeping children safe in education. I tend to go for the highlights because I think sometimes the little yellow bits or the key points are the ones that we really need to focus on. Do we, as an organisation, whether we're a trust or a school, have an effective approach to online safety? And do we have mechanisms, ways, tools, things that we can do to identify, intervene in and escalate an incident? And really, that foundation builds along those three kind of key strands when it comes to online safety. Being aware and monitoring the content that kids could be exposed to, being illegal or inappropriate, contact, and also that final part, conduct. So those three C's, contact, content, and conduct. And what does that really translate to in practice? And we all might, depending on our role within a school or a trust, have a subtly different perspective. But fundamentally, within Kingsley and the strand that we're talking about today is making sure that we have some tool in place to appropriately filter and monitor systems. And the word appropriateness pops up time and time again, and are probably the most important term, because depending on context, once again, school and students and who we're actually looking at monitoring and filtering, appropriateness is a key. And the reason why we say that is often the one thing that is really a real driver is making sure that we're not over-blocking. There was an interesting dialogue this morning that really stood out to me. When we as a business, and myself in education, started a journey looking at safeguarding tools, my first assumption was, if in doubt, block it, stop it. restrict kids' access to anything within school, and surely as a tool, as a provider, we're doing the right thing. And all the feedback from DSLs was actually no. What we don't want to do is send a problem somewhere else. What we want to do is be aware. We want to be able to see what's happening. We want to deliver appropriate controls across a network. So that element of not overblocking, but making sure, for a start, that all that kit we've invested in can be used effectively and isn't limited by tools that are over-complex or overbearing in terms of their controls, I'd say is pretty key. And again, as a school, if we're investing in new kit, we don't want to buy this fantastic kit and end up with nothing more than a document writer at the end of it. So those are really key strands for me that I think are worthy of conversation. And so when I sit down and say, well, okay, from a leadership perspective, what are the things we need to consider so that we meet our obligations under Kingsley? It's really about, do we have effective and appropriate filter and monitoring? Alongside that, do we have safeguarding awareness within the staff and cohort within our school? Do our staff have appropriate training? And training is a sensitive term, I know, both within the teaching staff and also the non-teaching staff, because schools with tight budgets have a habit of investing in things and not putting an equal amount of money aside to invest in the training to actually get effective use out of them. And time again, we have conversations about what budget we've got available. Great, we can afford X devices. And then the conversation is, and how are we going to train staff to use them effectively? And it's kind of, we'll have to look at the budget later in the school year. Obvious red flag. And then alongside that, we've got inclusion in the curriculum. Another strand from Kingsley is making sure that safeguarding, and I suppose this we'll come on to, is thinking more about digital citizenship, empowering young people to be aware of these things. And the more they are aware and informed, then the less these systems hopefully are required to provide that kind of overarching filtering. And then alongside that is also evidence. And as a vendor in tools that discover and track and monitor and control your whole IT estate, evidence is kind of like the number one thing. What's the point of anything if you can't prove at the end of it that it's actually doing its job and it's making whatever the desired outcome is, whether it's keeping people safe, saving the school money and resources, or optimizing what you do. So just in the same way, when it comes to safeguarding, you need to actually be able to evidence and prove that as part of an inspection process. So if we talk about filtering and monitoring, I know most of you will be familiar with the concept. Maybe we've got some subtly different sets of priorities or views on what filtering and monitoring is all about. I'm going to share from our perspective, which is really about those kind of three strands. It's about that e-safety, the safeguarding, and interlinked with that is the digital citizenship. And so as a vendor, we've really kind of started by saying, well, how do you filter something? The first thing is you need to be able to intercept and know what a young person is doing on a computer, and then to ring that alarm bell or that concern or that recognition that it's fine, is you have to match that against some kind of library, whether it's a library of URLs and websites that aren't appropriate, or whether it's keywords and phrases that allow you to say, okay, there's something here that should trigger and record. And when we get onto keywords, we start thinking, well, you know, is the biggest list the best list? Is it quality over quantity? What do we do when we think about our EAL students? Should that keyword list be both in English and in other languages? Should it be phonetic? Does a student always type grammatically perfectly? So do we now need to allow some tolerance in how we match these things? And all the time I'm saying these questions, I know there are plenty of network managers who'll be sitting thinking, all I get is loads of false positives, so it needs to be pin sharp, otherwise, frankly, it's just this tsunami of emails. Well, it shouldn't be, but it can be, because like every system, it's about adapting and learning and changing those thresholds and adapting those keywords based on what resources the children in your school use and how much you want to adapt to those. There are obviously providers of keyword lists which are kind of de facto. So the Internet Watch Foundation, if you want to have keywords that link to that online sexual exploitation and grooming, there's a source for you. There's other sources that you can pick up. Some of the most credible ones are local, frankly. It's about your kids, your community, the phrases and terms that are most relevant, and making sure that it constantly evolves. And there's also this move as well, which is these different strands of what we're filtering about. You know, traditionally, again, we'll touch on it, but with Prevent Duty, we're thinking about radicalisation. But actually, with the shifting change in our responsibilities, we've got the immediacy topics, we've got the suicide and the self-harm, and the need for us to know today to intervene where appropriate. But we've also got, thinking about Kingsley, we've got more of a focus on bullying, the peer-to-peer bullying, online bullying, homophobia, and so on. So the breadth of different terms that we potentially, within our broadest obligations under Kingsley, keeps on growing. And the bigger that list gets, surely that has to mean you're going to trigger more things and get more things back. So keyword filtering can be a double-edged sword. It's a need, and many of you who are users of our solution or other solutions, certain ones that know with us, often come and recount without divulging specific details, cases where it's allowed a member of staff and a professional to intervene and provide support. So the value is clear, it's about the effectiveness and efficiency of those kind of tools. And my argument, this is a good example of a word cloud. You know, it's not all about that immediacy. There's also an element about what are my year 10 boys or girls searching for at the moment? What are their kind of topics? You know, that's a word cloud that is more about intelligence. I don't want emails and alerts for non-essential terms. What I want to be able to do, as you can see here, is look for a keyword, see who's triggered it, drill down and see the details of what's been going on. Those are all the triggers for a particular term, and if I look at one, I can then go beyond that and see more. So this is about building intelligence, so we can see, you know, this individual's been looking at terms for weed and cannabis, and if we drill down and see in there, we can see very quickly, well, that's the website that triggered it, we can see the evidence of it, and where appropriate we can see what they typed, time of day, and so on. Now that's all and well, but I would argue, and it's the biggest one for me, that actually contextual intelligence is key. And from an educator's perspective, if we're thinking about how do we meet our needs, but do it properly and avoid the tsunami in the inbox and think about the bigger picture of our responsibilities. As an educator, when I walk in a room and I see Matt there on his laptop, as soon as a keyword triggers for Matt, my mindset as a teacher is, I know young Matt, I know his background and context, I know he's triggered keywords before, I know his issues potentially at home, I know he's a looked after child, I know that PC's unsupervised and it's in the library, not the classroom. It's 5 o'clock in the evening, not 10 o'clock in the morning. I've got all those variables that define to me whether Matt may or may not be somebody who's at a greater risk than another student. And what we don't want to do is trigger based on one incident of one word where the context could be completely appropriate. So the driver for me is all about building in that contextual intelligence. Now you can also take different strands here, and I'm not going to tell you which is right or wrong because I think the choice is always about your context. You can pay somebody else to work in your organisation to monitor and make those judgments for each and every trigger. You can pay an external provider to do that same process for you, but potentially you can provide tools that will also do that themselves. Who is the student? What else have they accessed recently? What time of day is it? Where are they, classroom or library? What severity of keyword? Was it a low-risk keyword? Was it something where we have that element of immediacy? Are they a vulnerable child? What website were they on? Was it a high or low risk? Was it a forum versus a content-based website? Frequency of recent triggers? Surely if someone's triggered something once versus triggered it 5 or 10 times in the last few days, we would make a judgment about whether there's a genuine interest and an associated risk with that. And so what we try to do, and it's something that we've done as a vendor very recently, is build in that AI-based risk assessment to actually do the legwork so that what you get the alerts and views on are the ones which have the more relevant context. And how that translates on here, and I can see how large that text is for you, so I apologise, is looking at something that's a risk. We've got a number of triggers that have appeared here, and we can jump down to look at somebody who's triggered about cannabis, and you'll see the top right, we've got a risk index. There have been lots of previous historical incidents, it was a high priority keyword, and so on. And so for every one, you can basically control and say, trigger me alert based on risk, not incident. And that gives you, potentially, whether you're the DSL or the network manager, and let's be honest, there's a lot of network managers who have to take a lot of the legwork when it comes to the initial alerts and bits and pieces. It gives you that evidence to build around it. So if we can then say a system's effective because it only actually creates those dynamic alerts based on the ones where there's a genuine risk and the rest is just stored as a background, we can then kind of build on that. The UK Safer Internet Centre provide all sorts of guidelines. I did this up until this morning on my Mac and I had to convert it to PowerPoint. And I'm quite disappointed because each one of these came down with like flames and smoke. I got a bit carried away with the effects, I'm afraid. But you can see there's some very key bits, which is a bullet list. I kind of added it, frankly, because I thought as a slide deck, should you wish to have a copy of it, it's kind of the main checklist in terms of what we're actually looking for in terms of our checklist, our age appropriateness, our filtering by age, our monitoring policy, and so on. So it gives a kind of a pretty good checklist. Language support's often one that gets forgotten when it comes to making sure we're meeting our obligations. And perhaps my transitions converted here are a little bit sluggish, so I do apologise. But it's a good kind of summary in terms of what we should be providing. In terms of awareness, the next strand really is, again, as Kingsley is talking about all staff should have an awareness of safeguarding issues, and particularly when focusing on online bullying, radicalisation, and so on. Now, I would argue if you've got the right tool that's generating the intelligence, not the emails, not the triggers and alerts, but providing those visual reports of trending topics by age group, that's a way that we can make sure staff have that kind of information available to them. And also that staff can record concerns themselves. And most schools will have different types of solutions where they can push and record their different concerns, whether it's the paper slip process or moving it up into a digital sense. But we can also take it the other way around, which is about the young people having the ability to raise and generate those concerns themselves, and we're going to come on to that shortly. In terms of staff training, another really important strand, staff need to be aware of what they need to be able to deliver in terms of appropriate safeguarding and child protection. Now, we all know, in reality, all staff within the school will be undertaking annually their safeguarding training. This is really just a reminder in terms of those kind of key training bits. But I'd also argue that, again, effectiveness of tools and reporting and information shared is really the driver so that staff get a sense of what trends and topics are going. It's all about proactive, ultimately, rather than reactive. And if we have a visit, to be able to evidence we have a clear picture on topics by age group, by week, by month, what the key terms are and what the appropriate interventions are, we streamline the process. And most of this, frankly, is about saving time. Inclusion in the curriculum is one of the other strands I wanted to touch on, which is really that schools should ensure children are taught safeguarding. I'm not going to read it out word for word for you. We used to have a lot more time when it came to PSHE within the curriculum, but ultimately this is about how do we deliver effective digital citizenship. Now, there's good programs that I'm certainly a good supporter of in our early years and into Key Stage 1 and 2. Programs like e-cadets are a way to make young children, the ambassadors. They actually promote digital citizenship themselves to other students within the school. But there is a broader process about all young people being aware. Now, again, earlier we talked with one of our peers in the sector, talked about when young people were searching for resources, giving them that kind of proactive prompt if it triggered a certain keyword. And NetSupport takes the same kind of approach. The first is about allowing young people from any device to report a concern. And that process of being able not to be able to have to speak to their form tutor, but deliver a message to a trusted member of staff is kind of key. We're also making sure this process is quick and efficient and electronic. So making sure that not only can they report a concern, but they can drag and drop and capture evidence of there's a Facebook thread where they're being bullied online and content's being shared, but they can actually then pick a trusted member of staff to send that concern to. Now that's all integrated, so it's kind of like, well, if I'm monitoring what they're doing, let's flip it round and be proactive and allow a child to report a concern through the same mechanism. And also that means that the member of staff can then be tracked when they receive their concerns. The second part, the self-service, linking back to that conversation, is actually, you're right, there's all sorts of really good resources out there. No vendor should be out there to try and reinvent the wheel or suggest that they know better than many of the professionals within the sector. So having a self-service access means that young people who have concerns, whether it's mental health or self-harm and so on, there are actually resources published within solutions like NetSupport that mean that a young person can access those trusted resources. Validated resources is probably the key, and then use those validated resources to actually go away themselves and access content. And one of the subtle things that was raised, and often it is about nuance and subtlety as to why young people didn't use resources like that, was that in many solutions, the keyword filtering would actually pick up the fact that they were trying to access external help. So also making sure your software and your solution is smart enough to say, actually, if they're accessing one of those URLs, then don't capture at that point. In the same way as you wouldn't want to capture your DSL's PC typing in concerns they've raised, because all the same keywords that they've identified would be triggering in an eternal loop, shall we say. So what I think there's an element of, we're moving along following legislation, but we're actually thinking this legislation, our obligation on filtering, shouldn't simply be about every time a word looks close, trigger and fire off an email, and somehow there's a magic resource. It's about making that process much more smarter, much more context aware, and then delivering out our obligations by providing, in effect, less workload on individuals and more relevant information. We also provide, I always put a little note up, our almanac. I like it because it kind of sounds like it's got my name in it. That wasn't the reason. But we put together, I say the royal we, I wrote a comment at the front, we got some specialists to write a resource which is really a handout guide for all different of the main strands we're talking about within our safeguarding, from present duty to bullying and so on, into one free document that covers all that and links to a lot of the online resources. It's something I believe we can access directly. Matt's not shaking his head at me, which is his very kind way of saying, ow, we haven't got any to hand out. There's a link that we'll share on our website where you can download a free digital copy, and it's something designed just to give teachers and schools a free resource that will steer them in the right direction, hopefully. Inspection evidence we mentioned. We never like really talking too much about inspections and what that might bring, but it's really about making sure that we can evidence that our safeguarding, and of course this is one strand, it's about that single central register and the other strands, but we all know if we fail on safeguarding, then all bets are off, we fail on everything. And so for each small part, and it's all about marginal gains, we've got to make sure that this aspect is good as well. And so one of the parts is about joining the dots up and saying, actually part of our evidence when it comes to safeguarding is about our filtering and how that feeds through, and then how that knocks onto things like our policies we talked about earlier. I think Tony asked about how many policies have been updated. Well, if they have, how are you actually going to make sure they're read and recorded and enforced? And so one of the things that we link into is actually making sure that as a tool, the same joined up approach, you can push out those policies. So the first time a user logs in for the new academic year, or a policy's been updated, it's presented on screen, they can digitally acknowledge they've read it, and then we've got that record centrally that all staff have seen, or all students have seen, appropriate ones. And of course we do have to be aware that when we're adding these kind of solutions, it should be part of our policies that staff and students are aware that filtering and monitoring and appropriate controls are in place. So we kind of build those elements together, and that's a strong part of our enforcing our policies. Our next one really is talking about good old prevent duty. I'm not going to dwell on it. I find it's one of those challenges where everyone's aware, and in truth it feeds, or should feed in, to the mainstream of what we already do in the broader sense of our other strands. I know it's a separate entity, but why treat it any differently to the way that we would track whether it be suicide risk or self-harm risk? Fundamentally, we need to make sure that we have the process in place to prevent people from being drawn into terrorism, and the 4 areas that we need to really cover within that. I was just hoping it was going to draw that for me there. It was thinking about it. This is another one of my fancy animations. Do you like the way that's just drifted in very slowly? It was supposed to be smoke and fire, but there we go. Staff training, DSL needs to take workshops to do that. Again, that often gets tied in, that you have that kind of start school year. IT policies are updated, working in partnership, and making sure there's a risk assessment that's undertaken. Typically, most schools that I tend to be involved in, and certainly within my own trust, we tend to do the safeguarding and prevent duty training as a kind of a double header at the same time, and make sure that we can evidence that staff are all aware of that. This is the bit where Tony perks up. I'm not in any way going to suggest that I could give you more credible information than Tony can on that. But there are some strands that are really, really important. One aspect, Tony mentioned that there were a group of us working on in terms of the broader GDPR, is about making sure that schools can look at the solutions they're doing, and where appropriate, complete a data protection impact assessment, a DPIA. The comment was that we're obviously working on providing some standard templates that the DfE will provide, but I thought I would just provide a little bit of a cover in here, assuming my animated effects, having migrated, actually work. They are starting to transition across. Just imagine the sparkles and the sound effects. So, documenting the need for the DPIA, documenting the process, what data you're going to collect and store and how long, the consultation process. You know, vendors should be able to provide you with a data map, what data is being captured and stored. We've talked about the idea about the policy and how long we keep data. The consultation process is really about who else is going to be aware in the school, what other leadership are you going to involve in terms of we need these products, these kind of tools, this is the data we'll keep, this is where we'll keep it, and for how long. And then identifying the risks. The reality check is any information we might capture and store about an individual, there is a risk. How do we mitigate that? Is it a low risk? Is the software that you use secure? How do you track access to it? And what's your retention policy? So really about providing that list of things to be aware of. And making sure you get sign-off and evidence at the end. It's a challenging one because much of these things, it is quite dry in terms of that checklist. But as stakeholders, we all have an obligation to say, well, how many of these bloody policies have we got to make sure that we've covered, and where's the evidence that we've actually tracked it through? So again, I just kind of wanted to highlight a few bits here in terms of what a good solution should be. You know, and I kind of thought, hang on a second, there are features and functionalities that may exist in some of your other existing products, or are linked into solutions that are built around this framework that already provide you with some additional functionality and evidence when it comes to your desire to make sure you are meeting your GDPR obligations. So things like having our data protection, you know, software licensing, tools within your product that can go away and make sure that user files aren't being left on desktops, they're actually put onto the network drive. It's something we made sure when we built into NetSupport DNA was a file scan. Look for documents that are in certain locations. So as a manager, we can make sure they're moved and tracked back to the right places. Discovery information, so again, that file bit, making sure you can jump onto a machine, remotely file transfer files about. Enforcing endpoint security, it's a simple one. We've talked about the diversity of machines we might encounter in schools. I respect the fact that's often, frankly, as much down to budget as it is about will, but making sure that you can say in a simple thing, well, if we don't have the luxury of making sure all devices are up to date, or we can go out and buy encrypted memory sticks, enforce endpoint security if they aren't encrypted devices, make sure that we can actually authorize memory sticks so we know that only ones authorized for the school have access to our data, restrict access to it, and then again, making sure that we actually identify and track any data history and track user acceptance policies. Lots of these things are just building around a framework that says we can actually tick off lots of these policy requirements within a single framework, you know, and again, it then gives us the confidence to be able to say, well, actually, in a single place, we can report on that and we can evidence that we're meeting each of our policy obligations. It's a bit of a catchy little summary I put there. See it, manage it, safeguard it. You know, that's very much the focus that we do at NetSupport. And so I wanted just to kind of highlight, without doing in any way a product demo, was kind of the whole objective for me when it comes to not just safeguarding, but the bigger picture, is identifying that within a single dashboard, shouldn't you be able to see all the kit you've got, and then alongside the kit, the evidence of how it's been used and where it's been used, and have the security in terms of the memory sticks used, the websites visited, the applications used, and alongside that, in our final column, that evidence in terms of concerns that have been raised, keywords that have been triggered, videos or screenshots that are appropriate being captured, and bring them all into a single place. As a network manager, that solely gives you a joined up view of how those strands pull together. As a network manager, you're probably more interested across those different platforms in also being able to jump on those devices and intervene, interact or update where appropriate, and that's very much about the NetSupport model, which is about pulling all those things into a single platform. And I provided a little summary here, which was just the fact that within our screenshots, you know, we can monitor an individual machine, but the network management, the joined up part of making sure that we can check these machines are being used effectively, as you can see here, is diving in, seeing different machines, getting proactive alerts, seeing the usage and resources on different machines, and having that ability to see them within a single picture. And so in many ways, we can take this view of a single technology allows us to meet our safeguarding requirements, our KICSI, our prevent duty, our obligations in terms of evidencing and reporting back on what we've done. But alongside that, it can actually be a tool that's productive in terms of making sure we're getting the most out of the kit we've got. I always think, as a governor, as a trustee, when we sit down and we talk about budget, we talk about spending, the immediate response tends to be a little bit of a pullback when it comes to spending and how we're going to use our money, our limited budget. But if we can flip it and say, actually, not only do we want to spend on this hard, limited budget, but we can also evidence in advance how we've already got the most out of the kit we've got, how the tools are saving us money, how much we can prove that they're being well managed, they're effectively managed, the school are meeting all of our obligations. It becomes a much more productive conversation in terms of adding to that IT estate. So for me, I think the focus is about having those benefits of multi-school focus, delivering greater efficiencies with your tech, because why spend for one tool when you can do multiple things at the same time? Making sure you get better use and deployment out of your existing kit. Minimise staff downtime. We always miss that, but it's a NetSupport kind of bread and butter. The heart and soul of our products are all about making sure that you can see proactively when kit's struggling, jump on kit and manage it, support it remotely to minimise downtime. 75–80% of a school's budget is staff cost. It's always the most important thing. It's a bit like talking about how we're going to spend on kit and not infrastructure or training. It's the same way, which is if our biggest part of our budget is staff, surely the most important thing we do is make sure they're as efficient as possible, as often as possible. So give us the tools to make sure that we can actually deliver that. And of course the final part, which is bringing that all together, is making sure we've got that single central view so that we can meet all of our obligations and be more efficient from a technology perspective. And so I really wanted to focus about the safeguarding aspects, the things that governors and trustees would ask. What are the policies? Are we meeting our policy requirements? Are we meeting our obligations? NetSupport provides loads of free resources. I've put a few on the screen for you there, which are on our website. They're all like checklists. What are our safeguarding tools that are available? A white paper on that, making sure we meet our prevent duty guidance, supporting Kingsley. They're all there. It doesn't matter whether you use a NetSupport product or not. They're checklists about the things to consider, the things that you should be able to meet your obligations. Obviously, we provide solutions for that. And ultimately, if you focus on a joined-up solution to monitor and manage your students online, and at the same time they can raise concerns, you meet your obligations, and you can manage all your data at the same time, then really that's the key aspect, we believe, in terms of an effective solution to meet those kind of needs. And that's me trying to whistle stop through, half an hour with a bit of time for questions. We're always about for a chat, we're always online, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of where we're going and hopefully a few policy checklist bits to focus on. Thank you. So I'm going to say, are there any questions? Tony, GDPR, any bits I missed on that?
Well, actually, just one of the comments I was going to say, I know we've chatted about it before, but the file search feature is really good. Just doing a simple thing of searching for the word mark sheet or mark book, finding out where teachers have stashed them over the years, is brilliant. It really is.
Well, I kind of share your view on that. I mean, one of the reasons we had that functionality was because network managers were saying, look, we've got an obligation to get all these files from everywhere, wherever the hell they are, and bring them back to the central point. And we kind of said, well, here's a discovery tool. But wouldn't it be nice if you could say, look, at the moment there's X hundred documents that are in the wrong place. We've told staff via an email that's part of our GDPR process, you need to move things to the right places. And at least then you can say, you know, that 800 is now 300, it's 200, it's heading in the right direction. But again, much as you will have encountered, Tony, you know, GDPR is this kind of beast that everyone was talking about, our inboxes were full of emails about it, and suddenly the focus has moved without recognising this is an ongoing living beast. But the truth of it is, the same tools that allow you to meet your obligations in terms of putting data in the right place, they're also tools that are just about effective network management, making sure you've got a grip on stuff that's happening. And that's kind of the reason why safeguarding to me in that full view of your IT estate, there can't be, in a digital sense, two separate conversations. You can't have a policy that says we'll do all this to make sure our kids are safe online, and in the same breath not have a view of what kit it is they're using. How can you have the confidence you're doing it effectively if it's not joined together? You know, that's part of the overall digital strategy that a school or trust should be trying to aim towards if they don't have already. Anybody else have any questions? I'll take that as with the home straight, which is a good one. But anyway, thank you for your patience and time.
Thank you very much, John.